Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chelsea Story Nook Podcast, the podcast where we dive deep into the enchanting world of the children's literature. I'm your host, Chelsea Chong Kim, and today we have a wonderful guest joining us to share their journey and insights into their latest book. I'm delighted to welcome our empowering children's book author, Tonya Ellis, the author of They Built Me for Freedom and 13 books of the series of Sophie Washington, to Chelsea Story Nook Podcast. Welcome to the show, Tonya.
Hey, Chelsea, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so thrilled and super honored to have you here. How amazing. You wrote 13 books right before this recent book. Is that correct?
Right. It was through several
Wow.
years, so not right before, but yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
That is amazing. What an honor. And why don't we kick off things with the introduction? Could you share a little bit about yourself with our listeners?
Okay. Well, I live in Houston, Texas, and as you said, I'm an author of the 13-book Sophie Washington
Wow.
chapter book series, and it's about a little girl from Houston and her friends. They're tween age, they're 11 years old in the 6th grade, so they do things like stand up to bullies, make friends, learn how to manage social media and cell phones and all the different things kids at that age are going through. So I had a lot of fun writing them. I'm a mom of 3, so my kids were the ages of the characters during the time that I was writing that series. And then this May, I just came out with a picture book called They Built Me for Freedom with HarperCollins. So it's my first big traditionally published book. So I'm really excited about that. And it tells the story of a park here in Houston where the first Juneteenth celebration was held. And it's in the park's voice. So I personify the park, and it's telling what its history was like from the time the formerly enslaved people learned they were free up through modern times.
Wow, that is beautiful. So let's just jump right into your book. Could you give us a brief overview, introduce us to the main characters, share us the core themes or messages? You can talk about your recent book or one of your 13 series of Sophie Washington.
Okay. Well, They Built Me for Freedom. As I said,
Mhm,
it personifies a park. So it's very meaningful for me as an
mhm,
African American woman because
mhm.
it's an area that is located in my community that I've passed by many times before I wrote the book.
Uh-huh.
And when I actually visited the park, I got chills thinking about my ancestors walking on that area, celebrating their freedom. So it really was very special to me. And it inspired me to write a story about it. So the book goes from the time some community leaders raise money to build a park, and then the park is telling you what happened. And so then there were families celebrating. It was one of the first parks in the state where African Americans could even participate in things like swimming or picnics. There weren't any parks where they were allowed to go. So this was one of the places they could go. And also then during the civil rights movement, there were protests for freedom and civil rights in that very park. And then during integration, when people could travel more freely and go to different places, the park fell into disrepair. So it kind of tells how people weren't going there and that the park was kind of sad. And then it had a rebirth in modern times. People raised money. They learned about the history of the park, raised money to revitalize the park. And now it's a big celebration area once more. So the book, and I love the beautiful illustrations. My illustrator's name
Yes.
Janine Muhammad, and she is not even from Houston, but she got images that I sent her. She did all kinds of history about the vegetation, butterflies, and all different things in this area and incorporated them in the book. So I'm really proud because it's truly a work of art when you look at all that she put into her piece as well. So that made me so happy when I saw the final product.
Wow, that is so informative and very charming, very heartful story. And what inspired you to write all these books? And what were the main ideas that motivated you?
Well, from the time I was a little girl, I've always loved to write, and I won a writing competition at school when I was in the 5th grade. And then I continued to write. And back in those days, we read newspapers. So I didn't have author visits at my school or anything, or even the internet. So for me, I
Mhm.
thought, well, I could make a living writing for newspapers. So that's what I set out to do. And then later, when I had my own kids, that's when I was sharing books with them. And my oldest two loved to read. My youngest, he was bored with a lot of the books I would try to share. And I would say, well, maybe I could write a fun story that would get him engaged in reading. And that's how I came up with the Sophie Washington series. And they kind of started like bedtime stories to my kids because I would just make up these crazy stories. And then when I started writing the books, I would share what I was writing each day with them at bedtime. And then they would say, oh, kids don't talk like this, or, oh, this is a little boring. So they actually had input in some of the early books in the Sophie Washington series.
Wow. And I'm always intrigued by the paths the authors take, so and inspirations that drive their stories. And could you walk us through how you became an author? What experiences that influenced your journey?
Okay. Well, for me, as I explained, I wrote at newspapers for a while. So all through college, I did internships. And
Mhm.
then when I was in college, I was fortunate to meet Dr. Maya Angelou. So I don't know if you're familiar with her. She
Yes.
she actually came to my college and spoke, and I was with a group that picked her up from the airport. So she spent an hour talking to us about, I was asking her questions like you're asking. I'm by no means like Maya Angelou, but I was asking her questions about her author journey and how she became an author because I had never met an author in person even at that time. So she was sharing that it took a year for her to write her book. I know how the cage bird sings. I know why the cage bird. And so I thought, well, maybe I could write a book one day, listening to her, and she was going through her process. So that was a huge inspiration for me
Mm.
as a young person. And then when I got older, I always just had wanted to write a book, even though I wrote for newspapers. And I actually wrote freelance for a magazine in my area for over 10 years. And I just said, I want to write a book. And that's how I wrote the Sophie Washington series. And I wanted to, I based it on books I was reading with my children because, as I said, my youngest didn't like reading. And I said, well, maybe I could come up with something that would be a little more relatable to him and more engaging. And I kind of based the Sophie Washington books on little chapter books that my kids read.
Yes.
So I structured it according to that. I said, well, they're all about 100 pages. They had short chapters. So then I made my book that way. And I kind of thought of it as just a fun thing, that a bucket
Mhm.
list thing I'd always wanted to do. But then when I shared the books with my kids' teachers, the librarian at their school said, well, this is kind of fills a niche because it was an African American family that was just more a joyful story, just fun things they were doing, not really like a trauma story as you see in many of the ones that feature the African American characters. And I took it out in the community, and people started buying the books, teachers and librarians. And so it kind of just grew from there. And now I've sold over 175,000 books in the Sophie Washington series through the
Wow.
right. So it was just amazing. I wrote the first book in 2013, and I started marketing them around 2018 is really when I
Oh,
really went gung ho and started taking them out. So yeah, so it was
amazing.
amazing and it was so much fun writing them because it was kind of sharing in the childhood with my kids because
Yeah.
they're fictional stories, but they're based on some of the different things that they would do when they were those ages growing up.
So, I mean, a person who sold 100 copies, if you could offer any advice to authors for young readers who are pursuing this path, but may feel hesitant or feel fearful about finding their voice, what will you say to them?
Right. And you really have to believe in yourself and
Mm.
don't hold back in getting your message out there.
Mm.
That's what I noticed that when I've talked to other authors and mentored different people, working on your mindset is the key to helping get your work out there because if you don't believe in yourself, who will? So you're going to have to
Yes,
work on that and believe in yourself and just put yourself out there. And what's the worst that can happen? Nothing
exactly.
happen. You're still going to keep breathing. You're still going to keep going. So
Mhm.
just get out there and take that chance is what I recommend you would do.
That's incredible journey. That's like such an incredible story. And as we near to the end, could you let us on any upcoming events or future projects that you're really looking forward to and want your audience to stay tuned for?
Oh, okay. Well, I have a couple of events that if they follow my page at Tonya Ellis Books, that I'm not able to announce yet, but it's coming up next month. I'll be in Houston in the gingerbread market. That's some event coming up. It's a fun community event in Houston.
That's cute.
And I'm doing some school visits coming up. But I do have a big announcement coming in mid-September. So tune into my page at Tonya Ellis Books.
Awesome. And what's the best way for our listeners to follow you, stay informed about your latest work?
They can follow me at Instagram at Tonya Ellis Books, also Facebook, Tonya Ellis Books, and on my website at TonyaDuncanEllis.com. And on my website at TonyaDuncanEllis.com, I have free Sophie Washington coloring sheets, video trailers, and curriculum guides for all my books, including my newest, They Built Me for Freedom. They're all free.
Nice. And that sounds all like an exciting journey ahead. And again, thank you so much, Tonya, for joining us and sharing your insight. It's been truly a pleasure to have you on my podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Chelsea, for reaching out, and it's been fun talking to you.
It was fun talking to you too. And thanks for tuning in to the episode of Chelsea Story Nook Podcast, everyone. Don't miss out. Tonya Ellis, the author of They Built Me for Freedom, and all her 13 books of Sophie Washington series. I'll include all the details in the description below, so be sure to check it out and follow Tonya for updates on her upcoming events. Until next time, keep reading, keep imagining, and keep believing in the miracle stories. I'm Chelsea Chong Kim signing off. Take care, everyone, and carry it on.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on today's episode of Chelsea Story Nook Podcast. Don't forget to order a copy of Carol the Carrot Bowls for the Salad Bowl on Amazon now. Tune in to other authors' podcast interviews for exciting discussions about their latest books and exclusive sneak peeks. Until next time, keep reading, keep imagining, and keep believing in the miracle stories. Make sure to subscribe, like, and hit the notification button. I'm Chelsea Kim signing off. Take care and carry it on.